So, welcome everybody to Let's Thrive and Shine Beyond Belief. And this is a podcast to be able to share with other people some of the stories and journeys that we have had along the way, which is either associated to burnout, imposter syndrome, limiting beliefs, self-doubt, anything that may be holding you back as either a leader, an entrepreneur, a business owner. But also our journeys and our stories that we're sharing, it is giving you hope and opportunity that there is another way, that you don't need to be stuck where you are. And, you know, people like Helen, who's going to be sharing her story in a moment, is a great example where there is another way and you can learn from those experiences. And hopefully you'll get some tips, tools and strategies to be able to help you thrive and shine beyond belief. So anyway, welcome, Helen. It's absolutely lovely to have you on board. And obviously, we only met a couple of weeks ago, but obviously we clicked, otherwise we wouldn't still be here chatting with each other. But Helen's going to be sharing her story. But briefly, Helen's come from a background, a career of HR, and she's also got a psychology degree. She's got loads and loads of coaching qualifications. And, you know, subsequently, she's also become an award-winning healthy relationships coach and speaker. I'm not going to say much more because I want Helen to be able to share her own story and where she's come from. And she's also going to be telling us about her debut book, The Fake Smile. And also, she's going to be sharing her entire journey and why people pleaser is not a great trait to have. Everybody thinks that being a people pleaser is really good, but actually from our own perspectives, it's not healthy. And I know from my own journey, my own pain, that it caused me a lot of problems along the way. So anyway, without further ado, Helen, over to you. Let's find out about your journey, please.
Oh, thank you for having me, Keely. I'm honored to be here and to be able to just share some of my own story so that it can maybe inspire some people and give them hope that you can change. And if you're a people pleaser, don't panic. That I do talk about people pleasers, but actually, I never think that that's fundamentally who somebody is. To me, people pleasing, it's a learned pattern of behavior and thoughts and feelings that they're just so well ingrained, we don't know that we're doing it. We don't perhaps recognize the downsides of it.
No.
Yeah.
And you are right, it is programmed behavior, and that's whether it's your culture, your parents, religion, your schooling, your workplace, the gender biases. It's the whole host of things, and for many different reasons, and there's different drivers for it. But you know, obviously talk about not just that, but also your journey, how you got to where you are now, and that discovery that people pleasing is a pattern of behavior that we're programmed.
Like most people that I speak to who are afflicted by the disease to please, it started in my childhood. I grew up as the good girl. I wanted to make my parents happy, make my teachers happy. So when my mum bought these beautiful dresses for me that I hated because I wanted to wear jeans like my brothers and go climb the trees, I felt like I needed to wear these dresses. I should wear these dresses because it made my mum happy. And that's just one little example. But when you do that over and over again as a child, you deny your own truth so that you can maintain the connection and love with your parents. It develops into this pattern where you outsource this need for love, like you put it onto other people. So it's like, oh, well, I need your love and attention so that I can feel good about myself. And that was my pattern. And so what that meant was that when I went to university and the first guy that paid me any kind of attention, I thought, this is great. This is what I need. I didn't ask, is this relationship good for me? I was just so amazed by all this wonderful attention. And so I fell in love. Unfortunately, it was with somebody that turned out to be very controlling, and it ended up being a very toxic relationship. But in some ways, we fit very well together because I was a real giver. He was a real taker. And I would just try harder and harder and harder to make him happy,
Yeah.
which was never going to work. That's what was going on in my personal life, but also in my work life. Being a people pleaser showed up as me saying yes to any new project that was going. I would offer to help colleagues with their work because maybe they had a deadline coming up, even though they hadn't asked me for help. I wouldn't take the breaks. And so this meant that I was overworking, and my body began to get rather unhappy about this.
Yeah.
So like I couldn't say no to anything. So my body began to say no for me, in that I developed all these aches and pains. And in particular, my hands and my wrists and my arms and my shoulders, I was developing repetitive strain injury. But I wasn't going to let that stop me, right?
Oh, we're superhuman and super resilient.
I know,
We can
yeah.
do anything.
Do anything.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Eventually, though, my body was like, no, you can't
Yeah.
do this anymore. Like
Mhm.
it got to the point where I could not type because my wrists were so painful. So I had to say something. And that was like the biggest wake up call for me was, oh my goodness, not only did I realize I'm going to have to take time off of work to rehabilitate, I recognize like this is more than a physical problem. This is something within me that is driving me to take on all of this work and to just keep agreeing to things, and that's not helping me. But it wasn't really actually until I studied transformational coaching that I came across these concepts that there are different things that drive people in life. For some people, it might be the drive to be perfect or the drive to be strong. But there's one drive, which is the drive to please other people. And when I learned about that, I recognized myself instantly. And of course, it has a light side to it, because, if you're a people pleaser, you're probably somebody that's really caring. You can read a room. You're probably a really good team player. You have a big heart, but it has a real shadow side to it. It means that, you're more likely to get taken advantage of. You end up overcommitting to things, building up resentment. You have relationships that feel unsatisfying because nobody gets to know the real you, because you're always adapting yourself to what you think the other person wants you to be. And it also means that you end up playing small at work because you're always worried about the impression that you're making on other people. So you tend to be much more cautious. You don't get the recognition you deserve. And ultimately, it will lead to burnout.
Yeah, and I think when you and I spoke before, there was so many correlations between my journey and your journey, and things that sort of woke you up, and the toxic relationships. And the interesting thing is those toxic relationships are not just someone that you are with in a partnership, but with friends. I mean, immediately I just thought of one myself. There was, because I've, like you, always been that giver, had that sort of empathy for other people, and you're the one that organises events, whether it's family or friends or trips or you're going out, you're the one that picks up the phone to somebody else or texts them. And immediately one person comes into my life, and she was what I thought was a close friend, and she was with me all the time. But then I soon realised that the times when she reached out to me was when she didn't have anybody else, and she didn't have a better option, so to speak, as I would describe it. And the only people that saw it was my husband and my two children. And they said a couple of times is that she's not serving you, she's taking liberties with you, because you're feeding her, organising things, you're paying for things and all those kind of things. And then suddenly it was like, I think it was my 40th, it's coming up my 40th, and near Christmas, and she turned around and said, she'd come down after travelling for a lot from where she lived. And it was lastminute.com. She reached out to me and said, oh, do you want to go out? But it's because I knew that she'd contacted other people. And for the first time ever, I went, no. I said, you must have me confused with someone that's just waiting around for you when you need me. And I said, no, I can't do that anymore. And she went, oh, I thought we were really good friends. I said, yes, so did I. I said, but now I've woken up. And it was the first time I'd actually gone, no, it was my 30th. It was the first time I'd actually said, I don't need you in my life, and had the courage. And I cried when I got off the phone because I thought we were good friends, but I suddenly woke up. But I also called a number of other friends at the same time, because it was a realization that they were doing what was doing. It was that toxic environment where someone's take all the time because you're a giver. And then you suddenly go, hang on a minute, what am I doing here? There's a one-way relationship that's going on here, and it's me that's doing all the work. So it does gravitate into many directions, doesn't it? Not just work, but personal life and relationships. And I also love what you talk about as your truth. When did you really wake up to finding your own truth? Was it when you did that whole training and it mentioned the people pleasing, or was it after that? Here's my dog.
My turning point, I guess my real turning point was when I hit rock bottom in my marriage. And I just had this moment of kind of awakening to how awful it was. And that happened actually because I had a phone call from my mother, which at the time was very unusual because my husband had basically isolated me from my family. So I never normally spoke to them. But she called me to say that she had been diagnosed with cancer. And it was a real wake-up call for me, a real wake-up call. It was that moment of, life is short, life is precious. What am I doing with mine? And also perhaps I deserve something better. I think it was really that waking up of almost like that healthy adult part of me. And also just the beginnings of the waking up of my anger, which I think I'd suppressed for so many years. And we need that. We need anger to protect ourselves and look after ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point as well, is that anger is not a bad thing. It's just how you manage that anger. And as you say, it's how you respond rather than react to a situation. So whether you are coming from an emotional space or whether you're coming from a logical space because you've had time to step back and think about it. But it was very powerful that you reflected on the whole situation, that life is too important to be living in the way that you are living, and be able to make that change. And it takes courage. It takes a lot of courage to step away from that environment, particularly when you've been isolated so much, because that's the power of someone that's manipulative. They're really, really clever of isolating you from your friends, your family, and all those kind of things. So you then feel trapped in that situation that you can't step away because you've got no one else to do that with. So hats off to you as well for that, Helen, being able to take that courage.
Well, that was really the beginning of my self-development journey. I didn't know what I needed to change. I knew that it wasn't my fault that he'd behaved the way that he did, and at the same time I wanted to learn for myself, what is it that perhaps I can change in myself or learn about myself so that I don't get into that kind of a relationship again. And I recognized that there was this theme of I was too agreeable, I was too nice, I would bend over backwards for people and then end up exhausted and miserable. And at that point, I didn't understand what that meant to change any of that. So it was when I learned about people pleasing, I was like, right, this is it. And had to go on, again, this massive self-development journey to figure out, how do I stop? How do I stop people pleasing and actually live life on my own terms?
But it is creating that awareness, isn't it? Trying to understand it, then what can I do to it? And also learning from a space of compassion as well, understanding somebody else, but also realizing that you cannot change somebody else as much as you'd like to. The only person that can change themselves is that other person. And the problem when you are that kind of person, and I hate to use the phrase victim, but quite often when you're in that victim mode, you end up staying like that, and you do on repeat with after relationship, you end up staying in that sort of victim mode all the time, and people see it as well. It's almost like they track you down and go like, oh, you are perfect for this, I can manipulate you. So having that power to go, no, I'm not accepting that anymore, is an incredible thing to be able to do. So tell me, obviously you've made some changes and you've done a lot of personal development and everything like that. So what are you doing now to be able to not only help yourself, but help others to be able to move away or escape from the situation they're in? So
yeah, the magic that I discovered was boundaries.
yeah.
So when I learned about boundaries, I was like, well, why did nobody tell me about these things before? So boundaries are basically like how you take care of yourself in the world. And when you identify what they are, then you know how to take care of yourself in any situation, whether it's a personal relationship or a situation at work, or with friends that want to talk to you for hours about their problems. That you know for yourself, like, okay, what are my limits? What is okay for me? What's not okay for me? And then learning how to communicate your boundaries, because it's all very well for you to know what your limits are, but if nobody else knows, then that doesn't really serve you at all. So, for example, if you do have a friend that talks to you for hours about their problems and you're not okay with that, then if you don't say anything, then they're not going to know, right? And maybe they can't change, maybe they won't change, but if you never say anything, then nothing's going to change.
No. Well, I think one of the key things I always say is that a no is a sentence. So, and you can finish it with a thank you. But, you know, no is a sentence. You don't need to justify certain things. But as you say, setting personal boundaries is just a powerful thing to do. And it's not only good for you, it's also good for them, because it's teaching them that it's not okay. And by honouring your own personal boundaries and being clear about those and managing expectations, whether it's your friends, your peers, your children, because if you teach your children the same behaviours that you're doing, then they're going to fall into the traps themselves. And why would you want that? Why would you want them to think it's okay to disrespect your personal boundaries? So it is so clear to have those. And actually people value you more for it, especially when if you're in business or a leader or something like that. If you're clear about the boundaries, then they see you as a leader as well. You're someone to follow. You act as a mentor for somebody else. Plus, the other thing is that, and it was actually my husband that shared this. He said, I had a female boss that clearly felt that she needed to volunteer and prove herself within her peer set. And he said, and the problem with that is that it wasn't just her getting all of the extra work, it was us getting all the extra work. So it then created frustration for us and resentment for us as well. So we're actually increasing the problem, and it then shows, you know, you're showing up as not a true leader to your team, because you're actually killing them with loads of work as well. So it's so important, personal boundaries. So
yeah, and I think when you're coming like from a people pleaser kind of perspective, you think that boundaries are going to create problems and they're going to push people away. And it's like we've been told these myths about boundaries, whereas you're quite right. Actually, boundaries are the foundation for good relationships, for relationships that feel safe, you know, because you know what other people's limits are, and they create the space for greater connection and greater authenticity. Yeah,
absolutely. And with kids, well, actually, it's with anything, whether it's your animals, whether it's your children, whether it's your work colleagues, your peers, or anything like that, having absolute clarity of anything is the pathway for anything. It's a pathway to success, because it's rather like, you know, I used to, you know, sometimes disagree with what my boss was saying in terms of direction and stuff like that. But if we knew that was the direction, that's where I needed to be going, I was clear, I was on that path. But when there's that ambiguity, so it creates confusion. And when there's confusion, it's like, well, I don't know what direction I need to be going on, and I don't know what your boundaries are, and I don't know what your expectations are. So then can't complain when things don't actually happen in the right way, and don't get resentful, because another thing that you mentioned here is that you start resenting other people because they're not actually respecting your boundaries, or asking you, how are you doing? Or, is there anything you need, or anything like that? Or do you need any support? Because you've not allowed anybody in to actually help you and support you. So they're not psychic. Let them know.
Yes, we always think, people should be mind readers.
No, they're not. No, it's even like a leadership thing, so some people say, oh, I can't say my boss, he does this and he does that, and I'm like, do you actually ever tell him? So have you had that conversation? I said, because how can someone learn if they don't know? And you don't have to be rude about it. You can just turn around and say, look, when you do this, this is how you make me feel. This is the reaction I have. And it then creates this, whatever it may be. If you have that conversation, a healthy conversation, assuming you've got a healthy relationship with your boss, or you need to create a healthy relationship, then at least you can go somewhere with it. If they're not prepared to listen and they're not interested, then maybe you should say, this isn't the place for me. But unless you let them know, how can they learn? And quite often managers don't get trained how to lead. People expect them to know how to do it, but they're never given the right skills or coaching unless you're with a really good company. And the same goes is even in your small businesses. When you start out, you need to give someone clear direction, or families.
Yes.
So. So what I would ask of you, so if you was going to give the listeners out there some tips and advice of what not to do, what would that be? Or how to help themselves quickly? So
I guess like how to help themselves quickly, kind of like three tips for the listeners. The first one would be to master the pause. So when somebody asks you to help them with something, or to listen to them for hours on end, before you agree, pause, breathe, and just give yourself time to check in with yourself. Is this something that I want to do? Is this something that I have the capacity to do? And you might even be able to introduce a delay in replying, by saying, oh, I'll get back to you, or I'll call you back. So that habit of just automatically saying yes, you've broken that habit, and you've given yourself a chance to consider things and come up with a reply that you actually want to give.
Mm-hmm.
So that's tip number one. Tip number two is to check in with yourself 3 times a day and ask 2 very simple questions. How am I feeling right now? And what do I need right now? Because when you're coming from being a people pleaser, you tend to be so other focused. You're always wondering what's going on for other people and how they're feeling and what they need. So it's learning to give that beautiful attention that you give to everyone else back to yourself, so that you really can take care of yourself, so that you can identify, actually, or is there a boundary issue here that, I need to do something about, or I need to say something, so that you can honor that.
Yeah, I think it's a great question to ask. So, and as you say, we're very good at asking, how are you? But we don't ask, how are we? And the way I liken it too is that if you've got a best friend, you're really good at giving them support and guidance. When they come to you with a problem, you're able to help that. But you don't do the same for yourself. And it's almost like, sort of removing my problem from myself and how I'm feeling, and I've got little Keely in my hand and saying, right, how are you, Keely? And asking the questions about what your problem is, so you can give them the answers in the same way as you would do if it was your best friend or a colleague or a peer or a family member. Because we don't do that, do we? We don't ask the questions for ourselves in the same way. And usually it's quite simple. Because how many times have you done that? Have you got a problem and you've gone to someone, can you come here a second? And like, I just need to mull this over. And you start asking the question of them. And as you're asking the question, you've gone, oh, that's all right. I've done that now. I know what the answer is. And it's like within minutes and you go, thank you ever so much for your help. And they're like, I haven't done anything, but just by verbalizing what your problem is, it helps you to process it in a much better way, doesn't it? So
absolutely it does. Yes. And then the third tip is to practice internal validation. So what that can look like is at the end of each day writing down 3 things that you did well. Because I think for so many of us, our default mode is to be really self-critical and to think about, oh, I messed that up, or, I said that really embarrassing thing, or I made that mistake. And we focus on the negatives way too easily. We want to rebalance that. And actually, no, these are 3 things that I did well today. They don't need to be big things, but just to begin to get into that mindset of actually, I can give myself what I need, and I don't need to rely on other people to make me feel good about myself.
That validation from somebody else. And I mean, how often have you done this thing where you said something to someone and then worried incessantly about what you said? And for them, they're like, I didn't even know you'd said something. So you worried and then gone up to them and said, I'm really sorry. I said, and just is gone in that moment. And as you say, is that not actually recognizing your own successes is just so common. Or the other thing, I don't know if you heard of the phrase where you've got what's known as the gap in the gain. And, most people are focusing on the gap of where they need to get to and going, oh, I haven't got there yet, and it's going to take this long, and worry about it. Whereas they're instead looking back at the gain of their successes, which falls into the whole thing, is that, practicing internal validation and gratitude and recognizing your successes. And, actually, when you look at it, it's like, I've come a long way. I've done some amazing things. And that could be from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, a month ago, or yesterday or today, but do that and it makes you feel so much better, doesn't it? So positive mindset. So if you were able to go back to your 20-year-old self, what would you give her as a piece of advice and why?
That's a really good question, Keely. Well, I would probably tell her to leave the marriage and go to therapy. Yeah. I mean, that's very kind of practical advice. Yeah, that is what I would really want to tell her. Whether she'd listen or not is another question.
Yeah. But I suppose from that perspective, is to shorten the journey of the pain and being able to heal yourself much quicker. But as you say, is that even parent and children, they quite often don't listen to the advice you give, and then later on they go, I wish I'd listened to you. So, but so I think that's important for anybody to recognise, though, is that it is okay as well to reach out for therapy and believe in yourself, because you are enough. And I think that's the important thing, is everybody is enough. You've just got to recognise that. So before I go into your book, if there was a book that you could recommend to somebody else, what would it be? And you might have a couple there. So have you got some?
One of my absolute favourites is Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers. It's what helped me to take the leap and step away from my career in HR to study coaching and to take a break to be with my family for a while as well.
Yeah.
I recommend it to everyone, basically. I think so. It is a fantastic book.
Right, okay. I've heard it. I haven't actually read it, so I need to check in with that one because it's one of the things that quite a few of us talk about is that it's fear that holds us back on so many levels, so many levels. And I liken it to, I posted it on LinkedIn the other day. I was talking to someone about the fact that we put cattle, where you've got the electric fences around yourself, and you've got that fear of hitting it. But you know what? If you actually step over it and it gives you a tiny little jolt, it is a tiny little jolt, but it's stepping out of that comfort zone. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes to take that leap of faith. And yeah, it might be painful just at the beginning, but it's okay. But it's your fear that holds you back on so many things. And what have you got to lose? You give it a try, and if you don't like it, don't do it, or give it a try. If you're not very good at it, then practice and learn from that experience. Well, you might find you're flipping fantastic at it, and it's something that you really love doing. So
yeah. Oh, I think you'd enjoy the book. Yeah, because it is basically you can handle anything. It's like you've got this far in life.
Gone through all of this. Trust me, what's ahead of you is easy.
Yeah. So that book. Oh my God! I want to recommend so many books. I think another one that I would recommend is Self-Compassion by Kristin Neff, because pretty much everyone I work with, and including myself, suffer with like that terrible self-critic, just telling us, no, you can't do that and you're rubbish at that. And somehow, like, we've learned again, like this myth that if we do that, if we're critical to ourselves, then it will somehow motivate us and make us get on with it. And it's like, no, that doesn't work. It turns out that actually when you're self-compassionate, that is what helps to motivate you and give you confidence. Yeah. So I love that book.
Again, it's one that I've not read. So would you say Kristin Neff?
Kristin Neff.
Oh, Kristin. Neff.
Neff.
Right, okay, that's good. Now, this is what I love about doing these things, is because you learn about new books and everything like that. And I mean, I love reading books. Although the one thing that I do always say is that when you have a learning book, is that read it once, absorb it, then read it again, absorb it, and then read it again, because it takes several times for you to really take on board what's said. First of all, you're like, oh, that's really great. But if you only do it once, it then goes off your radar. But if you embed it in and do it several times, then you then start, oh, right, okay, now I know what it means, and now I know how I can start implementing that in a much better way. So I quite often do that now with learning books. Otherwise, you lose sight of it in the end, don't you? So, bringing on the subject of books, I hear you've got a book to share with us for yourself, Helen. So, what's that?
Oh, yes. So there is a free book that your listeners can download from my website, which is Building Healthy Boundaries, an overgiver's guide on when to say yes and how to say no in relationships. And I share a little bit of my own story of realizing I had no boundaries and what I did about it, but it's also a step-by-step guide to how to get started with boundaries. What boundaries are, what good boundaries and poor boundaries look like, and the steps you can take to begin to identify what boundaries you need and how to communicate them. So that's just from my website, helensnape.com/free.
Right. Oh, excellent. No, that's fantastic. So I've got one other question that I'd like to ask you. So if you had a burnout songs list, and what I mean by that is that if you're having those times when you are on a dip or feeling a little bit low, you need a bit of a lift and re-energizing, what would be your go-to tunes that you would listen to?
Oh, well, what you might not know, Keely, is like I love putting on music, YouTube stuff, and just dancing and singing around my living room to it in a crazy way. So yes, I'm all over this. Shake It Off by Taylor Swift.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
You've got to do that one. oh, what else is a great one? Kind of I'm kind of a motivating one would be Fight Song. I think it's by Kelly Clarkson, I think.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll have to check that one out. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Yeah, but yeah, yeah, I have a really like broad range of songs on my main playlist. So yeah. Yeah. I think anything that basically makes you feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to say it does depend as well, doesn't it? It's like what mood you're in. Because sometimes, it might be one that you just want to have a damn good cry. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually really, really healthy. And people worry about, oh, I shouldn't cry, what will people think and everything like that. But do you know what? It's really healthy sometimes just to have that good cry. So play that song that maybe helps you emotively to do that, or as you say, those ones that are actually going to give you a massive lift. I
Mm.
quite often like, what's the album? It's with Christina Aguilera and Cher, I think it is, Burlesque. So some of her stuff, and they are great for having a real powerful sing out and everything like that. So I love something like that. A good old scream. It's even better when you're in the car and you've got someone in the park next to you, and they're like,
They can share.
yeah, to wind down the window. Oh, well, unless it's pouring down with rain, of course. So I'm just having to think whether there's anything else. So from your side of it, is there anything else that you would like to share with the audience that you think would be useful, beneficial? Any questions that you have at all? So
It's just to say that if you're kind of recognizing that you're a people pleaser, like that, take part, like it's really possible to get out of that pattern. It might feel a bit awkward to begin with, to do things a new way. Yeah, so I think it's good to find your own support in doing that. But like life will become so much more joyful and manageable when you learn to have better boundaries.
yeah, yeah. And I like that. And actually, on that same point, is also if there's people in your life that you've got a good relationship and trusting, is also get them to check in with you as well and just remind you of some of the behaviors that you're doing. Because, if you are naturally someone that likes, because there's a difference between being supportive and kind and helpful to that people pleaser where you're constantly on a give. And, when you're saying, oh, well, so I'll help out, or I'll do this, or I'll do that, if you're in that mode, is maybe asking your friends just to do a check-in with you and saying, do you really want to do this? Have you got time? Have you got the capacity? Because sometimes you do need reminding, because you fall back into those little traps because you're that nature of a person and that you're extremely supportive. Find that boundary. So yeah, just check in with them and get them to ask you. So anyway, Helen, it's been an absolute joy to have you on here, and I will be sharing the links to your social media and your websites, and of course the free asset that you've mentioned. So if anybody has got any questions that they've got for Helen, then please reach out to Helen Snape. And also from myself, thank you everybody. If you've got any questions for me, please reach out. Do please subscribe or share with any of your friends or colleagues or peers where you think, actually, I think this might be beneficial to you, because I know that we're going to have some amazing speakers on here, as well as Helen, that are going to give you some guidance and tips and support to show you that there is another way. So one important thing here is, everybody, is that the biggest thing that I learned, and I'm sure Helen has learned, is that many of us don't know that we're slipping into burnout. And it's not until it happens and it's too late. Sometimes it's a struggle to come out the other side. And sometimes it can be detrimental to your health inside and out. Please don't do that. Please check in with yourself and do listen to what we're actually saying here, and just going, am I doing that? Create awareness for yourself, listen to your body, and you are enough. Anyway, thank you everybody, and it's been an absolute pleasure, Helen, and I look forward to learning even more about you, and yeah, seeing how you're going, and also checking in with your book.
Thank you for having me, Keely. I've loved it.
Thank you.